Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you for being with us today to participate in this webinar organized by eTwinning Europe. My name is Marta, and I'm very happy to support this webinar, and actually the first webinar as part of the Spring Campaign 2021. As you might know, the Spring Campaign is here, and it will run until the 5th of April. And throughout this period, we will address the question, how to be smart online. But how can you participate? There is a place where we are communicating and actively participating in the activities, and this is the new group, Media Literacy and Disinformation. You can access this group by clicking on the link that my colleague Assi just posted in the chat and find the campaign page there. For this campaign, we have prepared some activities and webinars for you. Some activities based on different age categories, and you can find the materials from the sub-pages for the categories 7-11, 12-15, and 16-19. And we have some webinars. The first is the one that we are hosting today about media literacy and the role of cultural awareness. The next one will be on Monday 22nd March, with lie detectors, and we are pleased to announce that also the commissioner will be there. And the third one on Tuesday 23 March with the big youth ambassador. The title is "What is the impact of disinformation on young people's lives?" So these are the main info for the spring campaign. We invite you also to take part in all the activities that we have prepared with all the ambassador and get inspired. But without further ado, I would like now to give the floor to our expert today, Gilleran from the eTwinning Central Support Service, who will extensively talk to us about media literacy, mass media, and cultural stories, and the role of eTwinning in the process. Just some practical information for you before giving the floor to you, Anne. The webinar is recorded, and please, if you have questions, you can type them in the chat, and we will try to address all of them during the webinar and at the end. So thank you very much, Anne, for being with us today. You can now share your presentation, and the floor is yours.
Okay, so that was not my presentation, that was online, so okay, let me see if I can open my presentation. You didn't upload my presentation, no?
Yeah, just 1 second. I will upload it again. This is your presentation.
Excellent. Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much. And hello, everybody. And it's nice to see some old friends here. And I'm going to try, and I emphasize very much the try of this sentence, in looking at this topic, the media literacy and the role of cultural awareness, because really it's a huge topic. So now, why can I not move my slides? Can you move the slide for me, please, Marta?
I think, sorry to interrupt, I think this is not the correct presentation. Maybe we do one more try.
Okay. 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 Intro. Okay, so it looks as if my slide is not there. My presentation is not there. That's okay. I can upload it. Or are you uploading it for me, Elsie?
It's coming right now.
It's coming. Okay. So while we're waiting for it to come, I must say that, you know, this topic really challenged me when I began to prepare it, because, you know, media literacy itself, as we will see during the course of my presentation, it's such a vast topic. And indeed, they're all vast topics: media literacy, culture, society. All of these are whole disciplines in themselves. Thank you very much, Asi. And when I was preparing that, you know, I became to an understanding how vast a topic it is, because it connects education, it connects pedagogy, it links with cognitive psychology and indeed psychology in general. Media literacy underpins media studies, for example. It's connected with software and the theory of programming. It's a lot to do with humanities, with social sciences and cultural anthropology. So it really also deals with cultures and the link between cultures and the challenges relating to cultures and cross-cultural communication. Ultimately, it's all about education. So today we're going to look at a lot of things. We're going to look at a little bit of history. We're going to look at a bit of history about mass communication, for example. We're going to look at mass communication, society and culture. We're going to look at the influence of the internet. And I'm going to end with what I think are the absolutes that our students should know or be prepared for in this world. So let's begin. The topic starts with communication. Now, communication is a fundamental activity of all our interactions with others. We cannot interact without with others without communication. It's you know, a base rule. So here we have two types of communication. We have interpersonal communication, which involves an exchange of meaning between two or more people. It has to be often on just on a one-to-one level, as I am communicating. And normally this is face-to-face, but I suppose in this world we live in now, what I'm doing now to you is in a sense face-to-face as well, online face-to-face. It can be verbal and non-verbal, and indeed the cues of understanding each other, many of them are non-verbal. And we lose this a little bit on this online environment. Mass communication, on the other hand, involves sharing meaning through symbolic messages to a huge audience, a wide audience, from one source to many receivers. Okay? Mass communication has become, during the 20th and 21st century, increasingly computer mediated, and we'll talk about this a little bit more during the course of the presentation. And it can blur the boundaries between what is intended for a person and what is intended for many people. Okay, so the personal and the non-personal, if you like, become blurred in this area of mass communication. There is another kind of communication which we're not really going to talk about here, but it's organizational communication. And this is the way people working in organizations communicate, be they government departments or large industries or large companies. So they themselves will have their own means and methods of communication, their own jargon, their own kind of ways of communicating with each other. And indeed, many of us, all of us to a degree, live in several areas of communication, from the one-to-one, the interpersonal. We interact with the mass communication, and we're often members also of this organizational type communication as well. So media literacy begins with communication and moves on to society and culture. Now, these two concepts are, we say them all the time, but what do we mean by them? In the context of this presentation, society is a large group of people organized in institutions which are held together over time through formalized relationships. So, for example, the countries, the nations we belong to, they are formalized society, which are institutions organized by a law. Governments of different sizes economic institutions, educational institutions, these all come together to form a society. By comparison, culture is the knowledge, beliefs, and practices of groups. So we can have the knowledge, beliefs, and practices of a nation, but more realistically, we will have the practices, knowledge, and beliefs of smaller subgroups within the larger society. So a society can be made up of many types of cultures that interact and touch off each other. And indeed, in today, culture is not necessarily formalized. It's necessary for enjoying and making sense of our experience, but there are few formalized rules governing it. So it can be art, it can be music, it can be poetry, it can be the expression of ourselves in some way. But it can be our belief system, it can underpin our ethical system. So culture makes us who we are, in a sense. Okay, so we have this society and culture. This man is very well known to us as educationalists. His name is John Dewey. He was a very active educational philosopher, indeed general philosopher, in the early part of the 20th century. And he had a lot to say about communication and society. And this is a famous quote of his. He says, society not only continues to exist by transmission, by communication, but it may fairly be said to exist in transmission and communication. So what he was saying here is that communication and society are inextricably linked, and that one forms and influences the other. They cannot exist apart from each other, is essentially what he's saying. And he went on to say that, in a society, we should educate people to communicate in the best way possible in order to help the society to grow in the way we want it to grow. And that's interestingly something that we don't hear much about today, but it's as relevant today as it ever was, I think. Here are some points for you to ponder. Mass communication, and we'll talk a bit more about mass communication in a minute, influences both society and culture. Different societies have different media systems, and the way they are set up by law influences how the societies work. And there's a link here in this presentation which you can look at afterwards, which shows you how media and systems are approached and dealt with in different countries. We know, for example, in Europe, in the European Union, there's quite a regulated system for content, for privacy laws, for safeguarding copyright, etc., but by and large it's fairly free. In other countries it's much more controlled. There's a much more central governmental control on what people can access or cannot access, what is available to them. So already we have this kind of cultural, societal approach to how information is given to us, is sent to us, is received by us. Different forms of communication, including messages in mass media, give a shape and a structure to our society. Okay. So let's look at this, if you like, this phenomenon that came about in the last 50 years or 150 years maybe, the whole concept of mass media. Mass media and society are bound together and shape each other, so one is dependent on the other. Nowadays, almost everything you read and see and hear is framed in a mass media context. But the fact that everything becomes so familiar so quickly that it often loses its impact and meaning. And things are, you know, it's if you like, the impact of the immediate. So something is a 7-day wonder today, and tomorrow it's forgotten because another crisis takes over. And we've lots of examples where, you know, crises happen and are handled in such a way that other crises are developed and they take over in the media. And we have forgotten about yesterday's crisis. So one of the challenges to us today is to remember what's important. 25 years ago, maybe, there was huge famine in the African continent, and that dominated the news for many, many weeks. And huge humanitarian efforts were made to reach out to the people suffering at that time. And it had a kind of a lifespan of maybe 6 or 7 months, and then it disappeared. But did the problem disappear? And this is the danger of our media today, is that things are highlighted and then they are quickly forgotten. But the things that are important, they're still there. They don't disappear. Okay? So products that mass media is built around products, around popularity, populism, if you like, and it often trivializes the way we see society and its challenges and problems today. Nicola's asked me, what do I mean by success? I'm not sure in what context you mean, Nicola. So maybe if you can expand a little bit more about that in the chat, I can answer you. We have short-term memories, exactly. Exactly, Anastasia, we have short-term memories and they're getting shorter by the day. Okay, here's a quiz. And it's on Padlet. And I want you to, if you can, maybe Martha can put the link in the chat here. Thank you. And I'll give you the results in a few minutes. Let me see if I can share my screen so we can see the results coming in. This is a challenge to you. Can you see that, or?
Yes.
I'm not sure if you can see
yes,
that.
And
Can
we
you?
can see the screen. It's blue now.
Yes, you can. Oh. Yeah, excellent. So we're getting some answers in. Dates. So looking for dates. Approximate dates. And don't look it up, by the way. Don't look at your phones. Don't look at Google. Don't look at anything like that. Just put in a date. I don't see any dates going in. Do you see any dates? 1990. Okay, someone's put in 1990. Good. In the 19th century, yes. Try and give a more approximate date. TV. It's an interesting challenge, isn't it? And when I give you the answer, you will see.
Actually, Anne, we can't see anything. At least I can, so
Okay.
I'm reading the chat, and I guess also
Okay, you can't see. Okay, you can't see. I'll stop sharing. So,
but the conversation is going on in the chat. So.
okay. Okay, so I've stopped sharing and I've lost my screen. Great. Here I'm back. Okay, nothing is being shared. Not to worry. So let's go back to my presentation. Okay. Okay, so the dates. So I see thank you for trying anyway. So let's look at some answers here. Word of mouth, of course, began when human beings first began to talk to each other. So it's not dated. You can't date of that. Billions of years ago. And nothing much happened in terms of communication until print in the 13th century, or the 14th century, 15th century, in 1436. And print transformed the world, because print, and continues to transform our world, because without the whole concept of putting things into sentences and being able to communicate in this way, it spread knowledge in a way that was never spread before throughout the world. But we had to wait nearly 400 years later for the next big leap in communication, which was the telegraph. The Morse telegraph, which permitted information to be sent quickly around the globe. Then the telephone, you're right, it happened in the mid-19th century, near to the end of the 19th century, actually. And then we had to wait another 90 years for radio to come on stream. Okay? And then another, 40 years before TV arrived? And then another almost 40 years for the internet to arrive. And then 30 years later, after the first arrival of the internet, came the World Wide Web, or the WWW, the World Wide Web. So within a space of, 100 years maybe, our world of communication totally changed. From sitting down, talking to people, working in families, in groups, in villages, using the news that way, the news gradually, the way we expanded and talked and communicated, kind of shot into beyond recognition, if you like, in those 150 years. So in our lifetime, well, may I say in my lifetime, the whole idea, I had radio when I was a child, we had telephone when I was a child, television, but I didn't have the internet when I was a child. Okay? So I know of a world before the internet, before this mass communication became really mass communication. Let's go on. So these are the steps, we've talked about them. Print, the most powerful of human inventions. Radio, the telegraph, television, and the internet. Have any of you seen this movie, News of the World, with Tom Hanks? It's on Netflix. what's very interesting about this is his profession, because in this movie, in this film, Tom Hanks is a man who travels from town to town, and he reads newspapers to an audience for money. So they pay $1 or a dime or whatever to come into him, and he has a selection of 30 newspapers, and he chooses articles from these newspapers to tell people about the world beyond their immediate understanding. And it's a really interesting idea, and in a sense it's what mass media does for us now. It jumps us across the world in seconds. But into this area of communication has come this phenomenon, the phenomenon of social media. So as communication, as technology has advanced in the past century, it's become clear that global mass communication networks do not ensure that societies will coexist and thrive. The great utopia foreseen by Dewey that we talked about earlier was that the more and more sophisticated our communication systems became, the more we were able to communicate with each other, then the more the world would begin to coexist and live in understanding. However, unfortunately, that has not proven to be true. Communication systems can be and have often been in the last century indeed used as weapons. And I'm thinking of the whole idea of propaganda, for example, which can be really used to target groups, to target individuals in the most reprehensible way. So communication, and of course it didn't start with mass communication. It's just more powerful now because it's mass communication and it's social. The pen is mightier than the sword. Does anybody know who wrote that? I meant to look it up and I forgot, but the pen is mightier than the sword. So words are stronger sometimes, can really shape the way we think. Okay, let's go on. The evolution of a mass communication tool is like a story. It's a story of increased capacity to do the same good and the same evil things that we have done always throughout history in both society and humanity. No, I don't think it was Shakespeare, but I don't know. I'll look it up afterwards. You know, we're human, and human beings have a huge capacity for good, but they also have a huge capacity for doing hurtful and negative things to each other. And unfortunately, this has not changed in this area of mass communication. Thank you, Rosa. So here we have a poll, and I think Martha's going to start this poll for me. You have the first question there. How do you consume the news? How do you access the news? Sorry, I don't see the last one. Is there social media here? Okay. Interesting. So from the vote, we're looking at that online news sites are leading. A close second is television. A close third then would be so television, online news sites are by far. Social media, Twitter. Interesting. I would not have expected this result from this group. Radio, yes, is low, but what really interests me is how low down is our newspapers. Nobody buys physical or reads physical newspapers anymore. When you say online newspaper, online news sites, are they online versions of newspapers, I wonder? Okay, so now I'm going to give the second poll. Thank you, Martha. Can you give me the second poll, please? And some of you are already answering the question here. How do your students consume the news? How do your students consume the news? Yeah, social media. And this would be fairly consistent with any social research that's been done. Young people tend to go to social media for the news. Maybe television, never a newspaper. Interesting. Not the radio, which is also interesting. Okay. That's really interesting. Okay, Martha, thank you. You can stop that poll. You can only vote one. I don't know. It's a fairly basic polling tool, Giovanna, so probably yes, you can only choose one. So, how has the making of the news changed then? The process of, this process of making a meaning in a society, it's much more collaborative now, even now. I mean, now in the present than it was even in the last century, in the 20th century. Because more people are consuming news in network platforms, and all of this are managed by gatekeepers. Just a word about reading the news or getting your news from social media is that often the personal and the non-personal are mixed, so that there's a blurring of what is actual news and what is gossip, if you like. And that's a real danger about getting your news from social media. Also, things can burst out of all proportions in a social media setting. And how to control that is one of the greatest challenges in media literacy, in media today, in teaching young people about media. But they do have to understand this concept, the concept of the gatekeeper, because a gatekeeper channels what we see. Now, in traditional print media, in a newspaper, for example, this role of gatekeeper was done by the editor of the newspaper. The editor was the gatekeeper. So he decided, what the main story of the day would be, what would go on page 2, what would go on page 3. He would make editorial comment, or she would make editorial comment on what was written, the news of the day. So gatekeepers were there always, but today's gatekeepers, they make decisions not always based on a sense of, you know, responsible journalism. We believed in the old days of the newspapers in the idea of responsible journalism. And then, of course, came the tabloids, where the idea of responsible journalism went out the window. Now we have a mixture of the worst of the tabloids in some sense and the best of the responsible journalism, all mixed up together in mass communication in this social media. And we can't control it. Well, let's see if we can control it. We might be able to, but it's certainly, a lot of it is controlled for us by the notion of the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper shows us what we want to, what they think we want to know. So you say that young people use a lot of social media for their news. It's the only place they use it. The problem here, if social media platforms are only filled with mass media content, the comments of individual users, okay, digitally networked communication would be complex if that's all that happened. But that's not all that happens, because social media, we have rogue individuals, okay? We see hacker networks, people who hack in, and we have this quite new phenomenon, which is quite a sinister phenomenon, the arrival of the botnets. Botnets are computers which are programmed to create false social media accounts, websites, and other digital properties. So a botnet can totally disrupt something. It can create false, it can go into a campaign, it can sow 1,000 false messages there, swinging and influencing the campaign to move in a certain way, okay? We saw some mention of botnets during some of the presidential campaign in the recent one in the United States, where it was said that some of the social media accounts of the candidates were taken over by botnets who were printing false messages, etc. So this is a real threat, and this is probably one of the most dangerous threats, I think, to our society and our sense of democracy and culture, is how quickly people with bad intent can skew public opinion one way or the other through the use of these botnets. Okay. Right, here's another poll for you. So, thinking back to your childhood as you sat at your mother's knee or your dad's knee or your parents' knee, how many newspapers did they read on a daily basis? Okay, so the majority is somewhere between 1 and 2. Some people took 2. Some people, a small, very small percentage took 2, and a slightly larger percentage took 3. So one newspaper. Usually in my home, it was one newspaper of a particular political viewpoint, and the other newspaper having the opposing political viewpoint was never bought. But in a sense, we trusted those newspapers. Now, let me ask for the second part of this poll, Martha, please. So it has to do with you. Okay, so we can close the first one. How many sources of news do you use on a daily basis? Okay, so let's leave the two of them here on the screen so we can see the difference. It's interesting, isn't it? Okay, so fairly evenly numbered between 1, 2, and 3. What is interesting is more than 3. So more than half of you look at more than 3 news sources a day, whereas your parents, by and large, only looked at 1 news source in the day. Okay, now the question is, why is it necessary? Sorry, Martha, you can close those polls. Thank you. The question here is why is it necessary to look at more than 1 news source in a day nowadays? Why? No, parents, of course, your parents didn't have the internet. Why is it important? Because you get a more balanced view, or at least we try to get a more balanced view, to compare the information, exactly, Margarita, to make sure that we're not only getting, one side of the story. Here's a question. We are our own gatekeepers, or are we? Well, this is a very interesting question. It's more difficult than ever to get a list of the facts because we live in this world where everything we do online is filtered, all right? So when we read a newspaper, if we like something, or if we're reading a particular newspaper or a news outlet online, behind the scenes, the filter bubbles are learning our patterns, okay? So they're learning what we like to read, what we're likely to click on, what we're, where we're going in terms of our daily consumption. And as it learns how we like to see things, it then begins to only show us those things we like. All right? And that's what a filter bubble does. We have it on Amazon, you have it on Netflix, you have it on newspapers, you have it on almost everywhere. If you like something, if you comment on something, YouTube, all of these, they create filter bubbles which begin to give us what we want to see. Now, the problem with this is that we end up seeing and learning only about one thing. So the potential to have a world where people have different viewpoints, not only different opinions, but they also have in their minds completely different sets of facts, creating different images about what is happening in the world and how society should operate. So instead of bringing us together, the filter bubbles can polarize us. It can polarize the differences between us. Okay, so that is why it is extremely important to understand the filter bubbles in media, in everything we do, in culture as well, because a lot of our consumption of culture is also online. And this link here is a link to a TED talk, which is well worth listening to, on the way the filter bubbles control the way we see things. And so now we come to my opinion. In my opinion, it's not necessarily the only opinion, and I hesitate to say that. Was that not the case with the newspapers of the parents? I think to a degree, yes, but not to the same extent. Okay, the parents bought a particular newspaper every day, but they didn't, that newspaper did not target individuals and channel the content to the individuals, which is what is happening now. They had a kind of in their mind, the newspapers had an image of what their readership body is like, but it was not personalized, it was not channeled, okay? So I think that's the difference. The difference is that it's much more personalized nowadays, and it makes it even harder for us to come up with some kind of personal opinion on something. So what do our students absolutely need to be aware of? And I stress this is, in my opinion, you probably can add to this list. You may not even agree with it, but that's okay. The first thing they need to understand is that money drives the media, that everything they do online has a money-making scheme behind it. So if they're using a platform that they're not paying for in some way, they are the product, okay? They are the product. So everything will be targeted to get them to spend their money, to, okay, to see, to behave and to act in a certain way. And it is their attention that is being sold to advertisers. So if they click on something particularly, and I'm sure you've seen this yourself indeed, if you click on something and a few days later you start getting loads of emails or online advertising about X, Y, and Z. If you use Gmail, they scan your mail. So if you say to your friend, oh, I'm thinking of going to Istanbul for my holidays, you may find that in a few days' time, you begin to get all these ads for nice restaurants in Istanbul or nice hotels in Istanbul, or, you know. So it's all driven. It is all driven by marketing and money. So money drives the media. So that's the very first thing that the young people need to understand, that, you know, there are forces out there to exploit them. They need to understand about social media platforms. They have to be able to reflect what is the function of these platforms, what are they used for, what are the tracking potentials on these platforms, what are the advertising aims of the platform, and what are the cultural messages being presented there, and do they agree with them? Okay, because young people more than anybody else are kind of naive in a sense, particularly our young people, because they've never lived in a world other than this one, where everything is instant and available. And cultural messages, what becomes popular, just because everybody else is doing it, then it's okay. But, you know, cultural messages can deeply offend, can deeply upset the society from which these young people come. They have to be reflective about the messages. As a user, it's essential to realize the possibility that interpersonal messages may be shared widely. You know, we have so much instances of students being, you know, exploited in this way, by imagery, by whatever. They have to know how to present themselves on social media. For me, it's absolutely necessary for them to know this. They have to learn that they must keep what's personal and private and their public image two totally different things. And young people don't see the line, don't see the blurring between this. they have to ask themselves, is Facebook, Instagram, whatever they use, is this a reflection of what they want everyone to see? Is this the way they want to be seen in the world? And you know, nowadays, children as young as 7 and 8 or even younger want to become influencers on YouTube. This is a new career option, to become an influencer on YouTube. Yes. And I think, and schools have to do this, Giovanna. Schools have to focus on the dangers. Politics and religion on social media, are they represented in a balanced way? Well, you know, we know in many instances they are not. So I think the golden rule that we have to teach young people is to think before they post anything, maybe even throw. And parents have to be aware. Yes, I'm always surprised at, you know, how many parents put up images of their children on social media from a very young age. These images never go away. They're always there, you know. Okay, this one. How do we know? How can we trust the news? How is it generated? What are the gatekeepers doing? How do we recognize fake news? This is essential in today's world because so many things suddenly become real that aren't real. In a short space of time, they can be real through either they're generated by the bots or they're generated by people who are out to mislead us, whatever way. This is one link I found, which is a very good way, a good step guide to finding out how to recognize fake news. Okay. So this is, I'm nearly finished now, and then we maybe can have some questions and answers. They have to learn this, and okay. The final point is that our cultural perception is also very important. What is, this is a locust or a grasshopper. You can see that in different countries it's seen in different ways. So in the US and many countries it's seen as a pest, okay? In China it may be kept as a pet. In northern Thailand people might eat it as a starter, okay? But what we need to understand and realize is that in modern society, mass media often drives the way we perceive things, drives our perceptions. It is important to recognize and appreciate that different cultures have different values. We have to avoid judgmental attitudes, okay? We have to teach caution about having a judgmental attitude. That's right, that's wrong. While at the same time, we have to learn that there are certain things that no society can accept as it's all right to do this thing. You know, so this is going deep into a kind of moral, ethical tone, but I think we need to do that. Particularly the older the kids are, the more they need to understand the kind of ethics behind the way we behave, the way we consume mass media, the way we behave online, and the influence that that has on our society and our culture. I'm going to stop there. It was a kind of a wide-ranging topic, as I said. It was really, 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 it's such a vast topic. We could spend hours talking about this. But Martha or Assi, have you noticed, are there any particular questions or comments that I should
Thank you very
pick
much
up on?
for the presentation. It was great. And actually, yes, it's such a wide topic that we could spend 5 more hours to talk about it. Actually, you addressed most of the question that was posted in the chat. They are asking if we can share the presentation afterward. I hope you are okay with that, and we can share it in the group together with the recording.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And but definitely now,
Yes.
if you have more
Yes, no problem.
questions or comments, feel free to type them in the chat. I see a lot of thanks.
Well, I'm glad you found it interesting. I certainly found it interesting. It challenged me in preparing it because it made me think a lot about so many aspects that I don't think about. I don't, that I hadn't thought about before now. And it also made me think that my grandchildren were born within the last 10 years, so they will have never known a world where books and newspapers and all of those things were the norm. I doubt if they'll ever buy a newspaper. Maybe they'll buy one occasionally for if they get reported in it for scoring a goal in a local match or something. But they'll probably never read a newspaper. But they will consume news, and they are already, even young as they are, they're passive consumers of news because it's everywhere.
So some questions actually are coming in the chat.
So
that's great. The first is, what do you think are the greatest benefits of social media to our students? How could we teach them to benefit from it?
I think one of the greatest benefits is that it offers an outlet for being creative, for publishing creativity, provided they are allowed to absorb criticism. But if you think of some of the young creative artists of today, they start out by performing and writing and posting their music on a social media platform, okay? And that offers a creative opportunity that was never there before, because up to now you would have had to, be discovered, get a manager, be managed, etc. Now young people can do this themselves. They can have a huge creative outlet. I think the another benefit is that it does allow them, as we see through eTwinning, of course, to interact and talk to people of different societies and different cultures. And that's a strength. That is a strength, undeniably a strength. But all the cautions, of course, that I've talked about up to now are still in place. They have to be in place. But they are, for me, they are the positives of social media. The outlets for creativity, the outlets for ideas. If young people work positively together, they can actually solve problems. They can look at the challenges of the world and see if they can find a solution, because we know there is a solution in the social context of problem solving. But they are the positives. The negatives are the people wanting to make money out of you. So how to balance the two?
I indeed, I think the real challenge is how we balance the negative aspect and the positive aspect, because of course both are present there. And next question from Veronica. Imagine that you are in a class of 14 years old. What would be the very first thing you would do to introduce this topic? For 14 years old students then.
I came across some interesting exercise. One of them was a quiz, a kind of an activity where you make them all stand up. Everybody who's used social media since midnight last night, stand up. Okay. Um, so then anybody who used only one social media outlet, sit down. So, you know, and you do it that way. It's to get them to be aware of, what is social media and what they don't think. I don't think young people of 14 think in terms of social media. It's not a term to them. They think of things like Instagram, Snapchat, etc. They're tools, but the concept of social media. So what tools have you used in the last 24 hours? What did you use them for? Why did you use them? What was the benefits of using them? What were the negatives of using them? So to make them aware of the tools they use,
Yeah,
that's where I would
definitely.
start.
And also Martina is asking how to teach students to learn, read more from library and not only online. And Athanasia said students need to realize that knowledge is not fast food. They need to visit a restaurant, meaning the library.
Yeah, that's true. Print media, like if they read 10 books online, is that the same as reading 10 books from a library? For me, I want them to read. I want them to read books, whether it's in an online version or a physical version. I don't mind, as long as they read books, as long as they read things other than the 3-second headlines that are given on most news sites or on social media or whatever. As long as they get away from this soundbite attitude, where everything is boiled down to a headline or a 3-second read. That's what I would like to break. It doesn't matter to me that they read the library online or they read it physically. That doesn't matter to me. What is important to me is that they read.
Yeah, and
Okay.
also, Anna, I was thinking actually that now the world goes so fast. So this gives, of course, space to social media and to the fast information. And maybe we should also try to teach the students to go back, and not go back, but to remember that there is also another way of living, a calmer one.
Of course. Course, but also the whole kind of, and I didn't touch on this at all, but the whole concept of celebrity culture, where we've become totally obsessed with the way celebrities live their lives, and people they model their behavior on celebrities. They wear the same clothes, they eat the same foods, they watch the same movies of their celebrity. Like, celebrity culture is a real phenomenon. And where does that come from? I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway, I
We
think
can
we
close
have
it.
come to an end. What
Ben,
do you
thank you
think,
again.
Martha?
I
And
will just
Darcy, do you
turn on
think we've
my
done
camera
enough?
to say
Yeah.
goodbye.
Okay, we've
Okay.
not at all.
Thank you very much. I saw a lot of positive comments in the chat, so I think you really gave some inspiration and some useful information
Okay,
to
good.
participants. Yeah,
Well, I
yeah,
think
yeah.
make people think, that's the main thing. Okay.
Bye. Bye.
Okay.